Matthew 5 and verse 38. I'll read verses 38 through 41. It's a familiar passage to many of you, but it carries with it a tremendous truth for all of us. Ye have heard that it hath been said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say unto you that ye resist not evil, but whosoever shall smite thee on thy right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if any man will sue thee at the law, and take away thy coat, let him have thy cloak also. And whosoever shall compel thee to go a mile, go with him twain. Now I'm going to share a story with you, and I want you to put yourself in this story at one point or another and kind of find out how you feel about it. And it'll help us to determine who needs this Sunday school lesson the most, I think, based upon where you identify yourself in this particular story. There was a man who had been the victim of a theft in his neighborhood. And some of you do better with that than others, but he was kind of upset about it. He was determined to find out who the culprit was. He never did. And then he grew a little suspicious of his neighbors and was trying to deal with that the best he could. And he got out one morning, lived in the Midwest, it was the wintertime, got out one morning and he was going to make a run to the mall to get something at a Radio Shack. And he started driving and he smelled an unusual smell through the vents of his heater in his car. And his car was running fine. Mechanically, it was operating correctly. So he decided he's going to wait till he got to the mall to check it out and see what the problem might be. And he drove to the mall, got out of his car, and when he got out of the car, he noticed that smell was much stronger than it had been when he was inside, and it came from the front of the engine compartment. So he opened his hood up, and he discovered that apparently the night before, as cats are sometimes prone to do, when you return home and you have a warm engine, cats try to find a place where they can stay warm during the winter time, and it crawled up into the engine compartment. And, when he started the car the next morning, as you might imagine, the cat's tail got caught in that fan belt. And I won't go in any more detail. I think you can figure out what happened to the poor cat. And so here's this man at the mall, and he opens the hood up, sees this mess under the hood, and he says, he's got to do something to try to take care of the situation. So he opened the trunk of the car, and his wife kept some plastic bags. Some of you ladies do that. You don't want to pay the 10 cents when you go to the grocery store. So she threw some bags, some of them nicer than others, and he grabbed one of the nicer bags, shopping bags that was plastic, and he began to retrieve the parts of this cat from under the hood of his car the best he could to dispose of it. And he got a stick he found on the ground and was trying to get the pieces out the best he could. And he managed to gather most of the pieces of the cat and set the bag on the ground, and then went to the back to try to find something to clean off his hands. Well, there were no towels or paper towels, but there was a brown paper bag, and he tried to use that, but it wasn't doing the job. So he was kind of disgusted at this point. He looked over toward the mall, and he said, I'm just going to go into the restroom there and wash off my hands, and I'll take this car through a drive-through on the way home, drive-through car wash, and spray it off and clean it off and be done with this problem. Well, he got near the doors of the shopping mall, and he suddenly realized, that's stupid of me. I should have just thrown the bag away. He put the bag on the top. After he closed the hood up, he put the bag on the top of the hood and forgot about it when he was looking for something to clean his hands. And he was frustrated with himself for not just bringing the bag and throwing it away in a trash receptacle. So he looked back toward his car to head back there to get the bag, and he noticed a woman was standing near his car. She wasn't going anywhere. She was right by his car, and she was looking around in all directions. She was kind of suspicious. And as he kept walking towards his car, he suddenly saw her grab the bag from the hood of the car and make her way into the mall area. And he had the distinct impression she thought there was something of value in there, and she was trying to steal that. So he thought, this is too good to be true. He was going to get back at all the thieves in the world through this one act. So he decided to follow her. She had no idea what was inside of the bag, and she made her way to the food court area of the mall, and she sat down and put the bag down, and she waited and watched, and nobody had followed her. Nobody recognized that she had taken this bag. And finally, when she felt that the coast was clear, she had the bag on the ground. She opened the bag up and looked inside, and she let out a shriek, and she passed out right there on the floor of the food court. Now, this man is enjoying all of this immensely. He's looking at that, and, well, the people around her that heard her shriek and saw her fall over, they didn't know what was wrong with her. So somebody got on the phone real quickly and called 911, and they got an ambulance, coming over, and they're trying to revive her on the ground or attend to her medical needs. The ambulance shows up, and she's still coming in and out of consciousness. They take her and put her on the gurney. They strap her in for her own safety and begin carting her away from the shopping mall area. And this guy is just enjoying all of this, and he thought, there's just an opportunity here I won't have ever again. I'm going to do this. He quickly ran and he retrieved the bag that was still there on the floor, grabbed it, ran after the ambulance attendants, pushing this gurney with this lady strapped in there. And as they were loading her in the ambulance, he said, "Oh, ma'am, you forgot your bag." And he put it on her chest. And the last thing he saw is that look of horror as they closed the doors of that ambulance, ready to cart her away with that bag of her, what she thought was her treasure. Now, when I shared that story with you, you will fall in one of different categories. Some of you, my wife fits in this category, are somewhat angry at the man. Like, how could he do that? I mean, there's a line at which you draw, and that was not right of him not to warn her or prevent this. She was in a medical emergency almost. In fact, my wife, in her way, she would not even have me share that story with you, to be true. Obviously, she didn't get her way. I shared it. But some of you identify with the woman, and you think the man, that's overkill. He should have never done that. Some of you, as I told that story, you secretly wished that you were the man. That you would wish an opportunity would come along where you could get even with someone, because this lady was apparently stealing. She didn't know what she was stealing, but she was stealing something that didn't belong to her. And you're like, yeah, I wish I could have been there. I would have done the same thing. Maybe some of you were just concerned about the cat. You didn't care about either the man or the woman in that story. You're like, oh, that poor cat. You can. And some of you didn't care about the man, the woman, or the cat. In which case, you're just very negative and you need some kind of therapy. You got to feel for somebody. But if you, like myself, identified with the man in that story, and you were like, serves her right. Maybe if we had more of that going on, there'd be less people stealing. If there were more consequences, immediate consequences for things, we wouldn't have so much stealing going around in our community, in our society. If you fall in that category of people, this passage was specifically directed at you. If you feel a need to get revenge, to get even with people, this passage is something that the Lord gave to you and to I. See, back during that day, there was a principle in operation, particularly in the religious community, that says an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. You do something to me, I'm going to do it back to you. You take something from me, I'm going to take it from you. And that way, by the way, where did that notion come from? It came from the Bible. It came from the Old Testament law. I want you to see that real quickly, because the Pharisees were masters at taking something, a principle or verse in the law, and coming to a wrong conclusion about what that is saying. But I want you to look back real quickly at Exodus. Keep your finger in Matthew 5. Exodus 21. We'll see where that principle came from, that principle of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, or getting back, or getting even with someone if they do something to you. Exodus chapter 21. I can get there myself. And look at verse number 22. It says, "If men strive and hurt a woman with child, so that her fruit depart from her, and yet no mischief follow, he shall be surely punished, according as the woman's husband will lay upon him, and he shall pay as the judges determine. And if any mischief follow, then thou shalt give life for life." Here it is, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. burning for burning, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. And if a man smite the eye of his servant or the eye of his maid, that it perish, he may let him go free for his eye's sake. In other words, a servant was granted his freedom if a master hit him and just destroyed a body part, or in this case, took his eye out. And if he smite out his manservant's tooth or his maidservant's tooth, he shall let him go free from his tooth's sake. Then it goes on in verses 28 through the end of the chapter. It talks about even animals' role. If I have an animal that has a history of goading or pushing other people, and I don't warn them or prevent that from happening, then I would be held responsible, monetarily or otherwise. I have to give the animal over to them. And so the principle is there in the Bible, in the Levitical law, but the conclusions that were being reached here were not right. Now, when things happen, and it's certainly our modern-day judicial system is set up, when things happen to people, crimes are committed, oftentimes the focus is on the criminal himself. What should be done? Should we show mercy? Should we, and we litigate stuff like crazy in our country to try to, and the focus is often on the person who commits the crime. But there is less attention given to the victim of the crimes than would have been the case back in the Levitical law. In this setting, most of the attention was given towards the victims and restitution, what should happen to them if a crime were committed against them. So you're asking yourself, well, wait a minute. This guy had something stolen. He didn't want it, but still, a woman stole something that belonged to him, the remains of this neighborhood cat, and shouldn't some form of justice be given if she attempted to steal something from him? Had he not been the victim of a previous crime? We look at that and we say, wait a minute now, shouldn't justice be done? Shouldn't something by way of punishment happen to a person? How can God expect me to be gracious and forgiving towards a person who takes something from me? Where is the lesson in that for them? And that's where our focus is. What should happen to them? What should happen to the person? If they had just left well enough alone, we would not be in this situation. Well, God has his own way of dealing with people like that. I don't have time to turn there. If you want to write down Romans chapter 12, verses 17 through 21, it talks about those situations and the focus of the punishment that is meted out against people who do wrong is always on the responsibility and the shoulders of God, not us. But see, the religious leaders didn't look at it that way. They wanted to take control of the situation and exact the punishment on people. This passage here in Matthew chapter 5 is one of the most misunderstood passages of all. 5 times in this chapter alone, we see the words, it hath been said, and then these words, but I say, Jesus, but I say unto you. So there was a misapplication of the law across the board. He says 5 times, you've heard this, and a lot of these things that they heard were based upon Old Testament scripture, but I'm telling you this. The very Son of God says, I'm going to tell you how you should respond in these situations. We have time at the end of the chapter, it tells us why. We'll get to the why later, but he's bringing out these common misconceptions about how justice is to be exacted upon people who do things that are wrong. And people have taken this passage and misunderstood it, and even on the other extreme. Sometimes Christians say that because of the teaching here in Matthew chapter 5, specifically the text that we just read, that we're to be sanctimonious doormats. That anybody has the right to do or say anything they want against us, and we have no foot to stand on. We should not retaliate or stand up for ourselves. We should just take it, grin and bear it, and put on. In fact, this passage has been used to promote pacifism. There are many people, even in this country, who believe that America should not engage in war of any type. We should never send troops to another part of the world. We should never use weapons, lethal weapons, to take anybody's life, because the Bible tells us here as Christians, we're to let people do whatever they're going to do. We're not to retaliate or seek revenge in any way. And conscientious objectors have actually used this in a court of law, have used this passage to say, see, I'm a Christian, And I believe the Bible, and I believe as God's child, I am not to ever take up a weapon against another person. They've used this very passage to support their position to object from military service. So it's an often misapplied passage, but we're gonna see what it is telling us. Now, to begin with, I have to give you a couple definitions. I think we have these. Do we have these definitions, Liam? We do. So here, retribution. Retribution, God is more about retribution than he is about revenge. Retribution is punishment inflicted on someone for a wrong or criminal act. Well, we know the Bible teaches that principle repeatedly. Let me give you some examples. Fill in the blanks. The soul that sinneth, it shall die. For the wages of sin is death. For whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also. Okay, so that principle of retribution is scriptural. It talks about it in many places in the Bible. We do know that God is going to punish evildoers. If not for the blood of Christ that cleanses us from our sin, we would have to stand in that place of judgment by God. He does punish sin. But retribution is different from revenge. Show the definition. Revenge is the action of inflicting hurt or harm on someone for an injury or wrong suffered at their hands. In other words, revenge is more personal. Revenge is, you hurt me, then I'm going to hurt you. See? And even if you believed that God demonstrates revenge, God acts on the basis of his justice or his holiness. God doesn't take it personally like we do when someone wrongs us. But even if you took that position, you'd have to admit that the position of vengeance is not yours. And that Romans chapter 12 passage says that. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. It is never our role to hurt or bring harm or punish others for what they have done to us, personally or otherwise. That's the Lord's business. And he gives us this passage to teach us how to deal with people who would try to harm us or take advantage of us. Now, we must remember that these people will always be with us. You may have when I introduced this passage, started talking, you think I'm thinking of someone right now who I have a problem with. They've hurt me. They've harmed me. They've hurt my family members. They've done something against me, and I really have to struggle with my emotional disposition toward that person when I see them or think about them. There will always be injustice and people who try to injure us. But the religious leaders during that day didn't leave that in the hands of God. They said, we are the law, we support the law, we enforce the law, we are going to find out who's responsible for wrongdoing, and we take great pleasure in punishing people who do the wrong thing. They enjoyed that. They looked for opportunities to do that. Just look what they did to Jesus Christ. How, curiously, of all people, the religious community spearheaded the whole arrest, trial, and crucifixion of Jesus Christ. And they felt like that was their role in life to do that. They were adhering to the letter of the law rather than the spirit of the law. There's just something about our human nature that wants us to get even with people. And so Jesus addressed this in very specific terms. And he sought to correct this improper concept of exacting the law and how the law should be used to punish evildoers. So in this lesson, he gives us 3 examples. Okay, let's look at them real quickly. Number 1, if someone smites us on the cheek, we are to turn the other one also. Now, a slap on the face, historically and even currently, has always been a sign of humiliation. In fact, I was almost going to encourage you to go try that on someone today, but on second thought, I don't want you to do that. I don't know if I've ever in my life, without just fooling around with my brothers and so forth, I don't know if I've ever slapped someone in the face or had my face slapped by someone else, but I have seen it done in person. I've seen it done, and it is a very surprising, startling, and humiliating thing to do to someone. Now, I do understand, and some of you don't know this, forgive me for ruining your day, there's actually a competition. Obviously, Victoria, you've heard about it. There's a competition where the guys line up across from each other, and they they have a slapping competition. And the idea is if your slap does not cause the person to buckle, fall down, or pass out, then they give you a slap and they say who can last the longest. How they think of these things, I don't, MMA, slapping, chess, all those things are just a little bit beyond my comprehension why people would do that. But I'm not talking about, again, a competitive. I mean someone walking up and just slapping. Women, the Bible says, are a weaker vessel. So when a woman gets in a conflict with a man, outside of pouring gasoline on him and lighting him on fire when he's asleep, I mean, just in a personal confrontation, a woman will often resort to the slap in the face. I'm talking about unsaved women. You women would never do that. Amen? Some of you are thinking about it, like the guy at the back. You never think. But when a woman cannot physically stand up and punch for punch stand up against a man, but if she's really angry enough with a man, she'll smack him in the face. It's an act of humiliation. So Jesus said, if someone comes up to you and slaps you in the face, turn the other cheek also and say, go ahead and give me another one over here. That concept was not even heard of. I don't know if in history anybody ever did that before Jesus said that. It was completely contrary to everything that they had thought about that humiliating act. Well, why in the world would we allow someone to do that? Jesus said, he commands it here. Why would we allow someone? Because we are demonstrating to others the grace that he has demonstrated to us. Our sins were like a slap in the face to God. We disdained his word, his commandments. We trampled his grace underfoot. It's like a slap in the face. And he said, by doing that, by that act of turning the other cheek, we are showing to others the grace that has been bestowed on our life. I want you to think about this familiar scene, okay? Jesus was falsely arrested. He was falsely accused. He was taken to trial. They nailed him to a cross, not for crimes that he had committed, but sins that we had committed. He was nailed to that cross. They stripped him of his clothes. They yelled cruel statements as he hung there, dying for mankind's sins. Isaiah prophesied by this event by saying that he was despised and rejected of men. Despised in the eyes of men. Isaiah 53:7 says this, he was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He is brought as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before her shearers is dumb, so he openeth not his mouth. Luke's gospel says that they derided him, and repeatedly says that they mocked him. The soldiers mocked him, the religious leaders mocked him, the people that stood by the cross mocked him. So what did Jesus do in that situation? He prayed for them. Specifically, he prayed, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And we think about that. It is an amazing response that Jesus had for those who were, not only can you put aside for a moment the Romans' role in condemning a criminal by hanging him on that cross, but the people that he was dying for at the foot of the cross, yelling and mocking and deriding him as he hung for their sins. And yet he prayed for them. And he told us we should have that same element of forgiveness. Who are we to say, I deserve revenge? Who are we to say, someone hurts me, I'm going to hurt them. If someone does me wrong, I'm going to do them wrong. We're just sinners. The Son of God did not react in that way. And he gave us that example. Someone smites you on your cheek, turn the other one also. Then in verse 40, he gives that second example. If any man will sue thee at the law, take away thy coat, let him have thy cloak also. Jesus is now addressing our obsession with possessions. Now it's our thing. That man had something stolen from him, and it was like, By the way, the Bible has an interesting question it throws out at all of us today. What do you have that God has not given to you? Nothing. So everything that we have, God gave to us. But we are fixated upon our possessions. And Jesus is dealing with that, very sensitive issue in people's lives. I used to tell my kids when they were growing up, things are not important, people are important. Of course, that was not original. Jesus coined that principle 2,000 years before I ever thought it up. But we say that in our heads. Yeah, that's right. Things are not important, people are important. But we live as if people are not as important as the things that we have. This example here is a scenario of someone who is brought to court. So he owed somebody some money, and he had a time to repay it, and he didn't repay it. So that person sued him, brought him to a civil court, and they were standing before the judge. And the judge made a determination and says, yes, indeed, he did owe that money to that person. So he said, you need to pay him. And he, in effect, said, I mean, obviously, if I had the money, I would have paid him. I don't have the money to pay him. So you need, the Bible uses the word surety or insurance or, something to keep in trust. So he had no possessions. He had no money. So the judge would say, take off your tunic or your shirt. Take your shirt off and give it to him. And when you get the money, then you can get your shirt back. That's kind of how it worked, Can you imagine? That's humiliating. Here you are in a court of law. You've already had a judgment exacted against you. Now you have to take your shirt off. And every time you're walking around, people say, oh, he lost that case. He's walking around without his shirt on, And Jesus said, oh, that's not enough. When he sues you for your shirt, give him your cloak also. Wow. Your cloak was it was the covering. It was like a robe or covering. So people still had houses and places where they stayed like we do. But generally the cloak operated as what you would use. It's like a combination coat blanket. So your cloak is what you needed to cover yourself when it was cold at night or even during the day, wherever you were. It was your covering. So now I've lost my shirt, right? I've literally lost my shirt in this suit. Now Jesus is saying, give them that was the one thing I would really need now more than ever to keep me warm. And Jesus said, give them your cloak also. By the way, there's an interesting, I need to show this to you real quick. If you turn to Exodus chapter 22, back in Exodus again, remember I told you the religious leaders misinterpreted the law or added to the law things that were not meant to be there. This very issue has been brought out in the Old Testament law. And what the Bible basically says is, yeah, you can sue a man or you can take his shirt, for insurance that you'll get paid one day. And if you don't pay him, you won't get your shirt back. But this Old Testament law specifically says, do not take their cloak. Interesting. And they probably were very familiar with this. Exodus chapter 22, look at verse number 25. And if thou lend money to any of my people that is poor by thee, thou shalt not be to him as a usurer. In other words, don't charge interest. Neither shalt thou lay upon him usury. If thou at all take thy neighbor's raiment to pledge, that's exactly what's happening here in the New Testament, Matthew 5. Thou shalt deliver it unto him by the sun, him by that the sun goeth down. For that is his covering only. It is his raiment for his skin, wherein where shall he sleep. And it shall come to pass when he crieth unto me that I will hear from him. So Jesus was reiterating some principles of law that said not only should you not take their cloak, according to the law, the spirit of the rule of the law, the specifics of the law, but you better give it back by the end of the night because it gets cold at night and you'll need that. Jesus said, oh no, give him your shirt. Also, when he sues you for your shirt, give him your cloak also. Can you imagine how this went against everything they'd been thinking? They knew that the Old Testament law said, from the vantage point of the person who was owed the money, that he couldn't keep that garment after dark. Jesus said, oh, not only give him your shirt, give him your cloak also. There's a principle that he's stressing here that speaks about grace and going that extra mile, as we'll read about in a second, and doing more than it is expected of us. So that last example is found in verse 41. We're back in Matthew 5. And whatsoever shall compel thee to go a mile, go with him twain. Now, of course, that involved the Roman government. Somebody set up a law where the Roman soldiers, if they were carrying a weight or a pack, could require their subjects, who they considered to be their servants and less than them, to carry their backpack a distance of 1 mile, make it easier for them to travel. Well, it is said that there were, out of the city of Jerusalem, there were markers in all the roads leading out of Jerusalem for a distance of 1 mile. They put a stake in the ground and show that that was a 1 mile marker. Those markers were not ever placed there until the Roman government said, you have an obligation by law to carry the backpacks of a soldier. He could randomly walk up to you and say, hey, you, carry this for me. And he'd have to carry it a mile. So they want to know exactly where that mile marker was and go no further. And when they reached that mile marker, the Jews were not exactly in favor of this situation, as you might imagine. It'd be kind of like a neighbor who you have trouble with. Hope you don't have any of these. A neighbor that despises you, and your feelings for them aren't exactly, you don't exactly send them a Christmas gift every Christmas. You know, you just sort of get along with them the best you can, and that they would have the ability, according to the law, to come out and say, hey, hey, I want you to take my garbage out. Take it out. That's your job. Take my garbage out. And remember to take it back at the end of the day, all right? I want you to put my can back. In fact, my can has been smelling a little bit lately. It is, after all, a garbage can. If you don't mind, no, they wouldn't even say that. You know, when you take that in your front yard, spread all the garbage out of the bottom of that and clean it out. I want my garbage can smelling good by the end of the day. You know, can you just imagine a neighbor saying that to you? I mean, that sentiment existed in the heart of the Jew, who was compelled to carry this backpack for a guy they didn't like or know a mile out of town. And here's what Jesus said. Oh, don't stop at the mile marker. Go 2 miles. Again, what? You're demonstrating to that person what I have done for you. Jesus went further than 2 miles for us. He went the whole distance for us. I wondered sometimes if people practiced this literally when they got to that mile marker and the Roman expected them just to throw that pack down and head back into town, when they said, I'll go with you another mile. I wonder sometimes what the Roman soldier would think about that person. Really? Okay. And can you imagine that the opportunity that would afford, because this is directed towards Christians. Can you imagine the opportunity that would afford a believer to witness? The Roman soldier might say something like this: why in the world would you want to do that? Well, let me tell you why. Let me tell you what Jesus Christ did for me. The fastest runners in the world can run a mile in about 3 minutes and 48 seconds. So they'd have at least 3 minutes and 48 seconds to witness him. My guess they'd have a little bit longer carrying a backpack than 3 minutes and 48 seconds. They'd have a captive audience, a soldier who may have been indifferent for the first mile, who's suddenly saying, why in the world is this guy carrying my backpack another mile? Why would he do that? What's in it for him? And imagine the opportunities that might afford us to witness to someone. Now, you may not be carrying anybody's backpack, but you have other things you can do for people that show up almost on a weekly basis. And they might look at you and say, why would you do that? Well, let me tell you why. Because Jesus Christ did this for me. And I'm commanded. I was at a gas station yesterday on that trip back. I don't think I told Pastor Joe about this, but there was a guy that was, when we were pumping gas, there was a guy that was going through all the trash receptacles, pulling out recyclables. Well, first of all, I appreciate the fact that he was willing to work to get whatever money he needed or wanted. He didn't look to me like a drug addict. He spoke to me very clearly. He looked me in the face when he spoke to me. And he called me sir. He said, sir, you wouldn't happen to have any change, would you, that you could give to me? And I thought, here's this guy digging through the trash cans. His hands are filthy. He's got a plastic bag stuffing in there, and he's asking strangers for some pocket change. Now, I've often shared this in my small group. I'm a little reluctant to give money to people like that. You know what they're going to do, but we're not to judge them. But we don't know what they're going to do. We don't, advance a problem. But so I looked at him and I said, "Well, sure I do," but actually I didn't have any pocket change. So I reached in my wallet, and as fate would have it, I didn't have any $1 bills in my wallet. Still don't, by the way. So the smallest I had was a 5. Well, I already promised. I already told him, sure. And I didn't have any change. I didn't have any $1 bills, and I had a $5, and I gave him a $5 bill. And he said, "Oh, thank you so much." I said, "Well," don't thank me. Thank the Lord. You see, you do things like that for people that don't expect it or don't deserve it, you're going to be afforded an opportunity to witness to them. Later on in that chapter, it speaks about the whole remainder portion of Matthew chapter 5 is all about love. Every time we turn our cheek, every time we give someone our cloak, every time we carry that pack another mile, we are showing the love of Jesus Christ to that person. And that's why we can do it. And if you have no interest in showing love to people, you're going to have a hard time doing those things. In fact, you're going to have a hard time not exacting revenge on that person. So it's a good lesson for us to learn. I identified with the man in the story. First time I read that story, I was like, yeah, that's a great idea. I wish I would have been the one doing that. I would have probably grabbed that bag and followed her too. That just sounds like something I would be tempted to do. But Jesus says there's a higher road to travel here. And that's the road of love.